It's autumn time, so we're about to get ready for winter for our bees. There's a whole bunch of things we need to do to make sure that they're set up properly for winter. If you get too many of them wrong, you're very likely to lose your hive, so they're quite important steps to take. So we'll go through what we do. I've jotted down about 7 steps, and hopefully some of it's of use to you. So the most obvious thing, of course, is just to check the brood and check the brood laying. You want to make sure that they've still got some brood and the queen's still laying eggs at this time. So we're sort of at the middle of March, and it's also a good time to check for AFB because there's not so many bees in the hives at the moment. They've reduced their numbers a bit, so you can easily shake off the brood hives and just check for those AFB cells. Another thing to do is to check the mites, and I would say treat the mites at this stage. You should be maybe treating the mites at least a couple of times over summer. I would do it again in autumn because especially because we're in the city here and the bees just constantly get reinfected with mites. They don't call it Varroa destructive for nothing. The mites are just absolutely lethal. So if you've got a high mite load going into winter, then you've probably lost your hive. They're just not going to make it. They're going to have like about 3 or 4 mites for every larvae, and they're just going to destroy your hive. So chances of your hive surviving winter with a high mite load is very slim. So I would treat them now. Also reduce the entrances. Very important this time of year, especially because they're just about in drought conditions at the moment. So if you have a look at what I've done here, you can see that I've got a metal strip there and I've got a few teeth missing where the bees are going in and out. And that especially reduces the ability for other bees to come in around the edges from other hives and start robbing. So you've got a few things to worry about. Robbing from bees and wasps, and it's mostly bees that do all the robbing. You can't actually see it because they don't wear different coloured coats when they come in and out of the hive, but there's a lot of robbing between hives, and your neighbour's hive down the street could rob your hives out. And the other thing you put the entrance reducers on are for mice, because we've had a mouse get in one of our hives, and they wreak havoc in there. They basically eat the pollen, they eat the honey, they dig through the frames, they chew the frames, and they can just kill the hive as well, because of course they've got no food or brood and food or stores of any sort in there. So entrance reducers, they should have probably been on already, but very important to get those in. If you don't have a metal strip like I've got, which you probably don't, maybe just put a bit of wood down, but then have a very small gap, just 3 or 4 sort of bee spaces wide. Otherwise the mouse will squeeze in there like it squeezes under a door frame. Check the food for the hives. The hive should be maybe if you lift up a whole box of bees, you should have maybe about 20 kilos of weight in there. If you haven't, if it's just light, or you go through your hive and you see that there's just no food in all the frames, chances are they're being robbed out and they really need food. But you also need to address the robbing situation as well. Maybe you need to move those bees somewhere else, because if they haven't kept any of their honey from the summer, chances are you'll put a frame feeder in there, you'll feed them, and they'll just get robbed out straight away, so they won't retain any of that food. If you are going to put a frame feeder in, I've got one here, or something else for the syrup, maybe you've got a top feeder, just make sure, like I have here, you can see that I put some fern fronds in there. Put some bracken or grass or sort of hay or straw in there, but you definitely need something in that feeder, otherwise the bees are just going to go into a feeding frenzy and then push each other into the liquid, and you'll lose half of your hive, which is pretty demoralizing. That might be just enough to knock your hive out as well. What else have we got? So this is the time to reduce the frames in the boxes. So if you've got a box on the top that's just full of empty frames, just take it off. You don't need that anymore. If you've got 2 supers and you've got a mixture of honey and empty frames, then put all the honey frames into one box and just take the other box of empties away. So try and do what you can to reduce the size of the boxes and take away any excess at all. You might even, if your colony is quite small and it's in a single box, you might even want to reduce that into a nuke box, because otherwise you've got a big area to keep warm. So if you've only got 4 frames of bees in a whole box, then they're really going to struggle to keep that space warm, and they're going to struggle to defend it against wax moth and everything else that might crawl in there. So insulate the lid, which is basically you want to stop that heat from rising out of the hive as much as you can. So if you can put any insulation on top of the lid, that all helps. So I've got an example here. This is I don't know if you've seen these before, this is a quilt box. The idea is the heat rises up, it hits the metal roof, it condensates, falls onto here, and the air blowing through dries it off. So that's one type of insulation you can use. Another one, you could use something more simple. You could use something like this, or some sacking or paper, or some sort of polystyrene. But one thing to be careful about is with a lid like this, with these cheap sprung lids, you will find that water will bead under here and it will wick on top of here, and you'll end up with a big wet mass on the top. So you just want to think about what you're using there. So if I was to say use this setup, I would put a big sack over top so that there's no way the water could come down. And you also want this lid covering that hive mat. And the other thing with the lid is you want to make sure it's secure as well. So you can see this is just flopping around here. If wind picks a sprung lid like this, the wind will pick it up and it will just flip it. So you definitely want to put a brick on top. That's enough, I find, for where I put my apiaries. Just one brick will stop this lid from flipping off and flying off into the distance. Another thing, I can just come around here. If you've got a wooden floor like this, tip the hive forward a little bit. Sorry, I'll just show you. So this type of wooden floor here. So just grab a piece of wood like this, put it under the back, up there. Oh, they've got a nice amount of food, that's great. I can't lift that. So put this bit of wood under here. You've got a little bit of a slope. It will stop the water from pooling. So if the wind's blowing and it's raining and all the water's coming in the front here, it might pool at the back, and then you've got a wet, moldy spot in your hive, which is really not good for the bees, as you can imagine. And I think that's about it. I think that's most of the things. Oh, one more. If you've got 2 boxes and you've had a queen excluder in there like this, now's the time to take that queen excluder out. So what happens is that the bees will naturally migrate up to the top where it's warm and the honey is. So if you've got 2 boxes, your colony's going to go up like this, and of course there'll be one bee that'll get trapped because she can't get through the queen excluder, and that's the end of your colony. So definitely take these queen excluders out. Alright, that's all I've got. Thanks. Good luck.